Шановне товариство, доброго ранку.
Good morning, dear participants. It's my honor to welcome you at the Cultural Diplomacy Forum. It's the 5th forum, and after 2 overseas editions, it's back to Kiev. We are grateful to the armed forces of Ukraine for having this opportunity to hold the forum.
Промовляти перед практиками культурної дипломатії для мене так само трепетно.
It's a great privilege to talk in front of representatives of cultural diplomacy. It's as important as talking in front of our defenders, because you are also protecting Ukrainian senses, Ukrainian identity, the Ukrainian practices. Yet I won't call this work a cultural frontline, because nothing can be called a frontline except for the immediate battlefield. The cultural diplomacy is not each and every appearance of Ukrainian representatives on the international arena. Cultural diplomacy is first and foremost the institutional work, the strategic efforts, and defining the pathways. It's sometimes work of a surgeon or a jeweler. Ukrainian Institute, a flagship cultural diplomacy institution, has been active for 6 years, constructing the architecture of this activity, standards, values, and processes. It is an all-mean feat to be a speaker, a communicator of the most dramatic events in the Ukrainian history. This also means cognition of your own depth, your own capacities. Cultural diplomacy works both ways. It helps you recognize yourself as well. Ukrainian language is used all across the globe for discussing various issues between intellectually apt people. This is the dialogue of peers instead of a dialogue of winner and the victim. It's the right to your own voice and history, because the culture helps us explain who we are, who we would like to be, and what we'd like to do, what role we'd like to play in the European community. The ambitions of geopolitical narrative contradict the cultural narrative, and our enemy reminds us every day of that fact. The war is an occasion to learn the world's peculiarities, the true face of the world. Before the start of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine has been perceived typically as a suspicious player or a risk factor for the food security within the region, or just as the white spot on the map. Many countries of Asia, of Africa, and Latin America have never had a systemic communication with us for a certain period of time. However, the communication which failed in the political dimension is more successful in the cultural area. It's great that you are still able to be poets. A Mexican journalist said to me after the world learned about the Bucha events. Your poems are emotional, it's good, but look like a documentary. It looks scary. One of Ukrainian directions is organization of visits for journalists. The delegates arrive in Ukraine with various background, and they represent various regions. They have also versatile interests. They are, of course, interested in the scenes of mass sufferings. Once, a journalist from Brazil asked me to explain what steppe means for us. We often talk about Dikapol, Budjak, Chumatsky Plast in the Ukrainian folklore. We are watching the landscape created by Ukrainian artists. I know what it means because the landscape helps a person understand the outlines of steppes and the peculiarities of the air we breathe. It seems that I understand, said this journalist. Now I see what kind of steppe you had, what you would like to fight for. There is a big memorial in honor of Kwame Nkrumah, and this is an ideologist of Ghana who created this country to an independent state. I was once invited to a festival, and we sometimes joke that there are some colonizers are better than the others, especially when after these colonizers the countries have international language and good institutions. A young writer from Ghana can start writing in English, and immediately he can get to the international area. He does not have to overcome the language barrier. And however, the writer from Ghana, this Martin, said that we were lucky to have Britain as colonizers. Unlike our situation, it's highly unlikely that we will be writing in Russian afterwards. At the same festival, I was asked about our own language. It was not an intention to offend me. There are lots of various languages in Africa that disappear. Ukraine is a terra incognita for Africa, so they do not know whether we've got the same situation. However, I was deeply impressed by this question. I share this story many times in public. Language is the only possible environment for our existence, yet it cannot be seen from a distance. There is not a single piece of knowledge that can be called final. So cultural diplomacy exists to glue the layers of consciousness. This is the way to invite each other, to learn each other. Ukrainian cultural diplomacy sometimes reminds a wise girl from a fairy tale. She was asked by a king to appear in the palace neither on foot nor on horseback, neither clothed nor nude. So this is the opportunity to demonstrate flexibility. The same is true for the diplomacy. Diplomacy should sound loudly, however, it should not look like shouting. I have had some advocacy experience on an international forum. I'd like to share some paradox with you. Lots of actors tell me that you are so confident in your culture that you leave your relatives under shelling. You travel for a couple of days to participate in conferences, exhibitions, concerts. But our trust in culture is associated with the various emotions. Sometimes people are fascinated, sometimes they are septic. It is not also always possible to explain that the field of culture has always been the way to demonstrate the personal belonging, even at the time of the occupation. It has always been our common mental boundary. Simon Petlura in 1919 created the Ukrainian Republican Orchestra. It cost him 1 million francs. This orchestra participated in the global tour. It was intended to demonstrate that the country was under threat of new Denikin strike or attack, but still it was important to delegate this orchestra to show that it could be capable irrespective of the external circumstances. In December 2022, Ukrainian Shadrik was performed in Carnegie Hall. The attention of the global media was directed towards Ukrainians who were under shelling, who experienced blackouts, and nonetheless they listened to Shadrik. It was a great miracle. It was a recognition of belonging to the history. So cultural diplomacy is also a tool for making this great history visible and uninterrupted. At the time of turbulence, we talk a lot about culture as a bridge, dialogue space, and weapons, finally. But it seems that we are not convinced ourselves, except for really passionate people. Still, we have to recognize that culture is a strategic weapon that should be considered in the long-term planning. Post-Soviet paradigm made us think that our only export industry is heavy industry. However, national culture can be also an item of the national export. Instead of heavy industry products, I'm talking on behalf of the generation of cultural activists who have been hoping for institutional capacity of Ukrainian culture and our visibility in the international arena. It is not about paternalism and preference, but about common spaces, about intellectual dialogue, about environment and involvement. The work of the Ukrainian Institute created this ecosystem. So together with my generation, I still believe that the external threats we are subject to won't be an internal threat for this ecosystem. And ultimately, the cultural diplomacy is the prerequisite for a metapolitics and multidisciplinary approach. Every generation has to fight against evil, and this is the result of intellectual weakness.
Використовуючи для цього маніпулятивну пропаганду.
By using manipulation, propaganda, and disinformation instead of that, as opposed to that, intellectual strength and the knowledge about the world around is always based on your experience, and that gives you a good set of tools to counter the lies. And Ukraine has learned from the world, but also has something to share. The global coalition of Ukrainian studios, about the creation of which it was announced in this next summer in the US, might bring fruit that the planters would hardly see, but that should have been planted, because countering evil implies having intellectuality and our joint and common values. The consecutivity of our politics, cultural and others, is something that we can potentially lose. To consecutively, we need to develop what had been appropriated by Russia for hundreds of years. We need to promote culture on international level. We need to talk about not only the war bereavements and losses, but also about resilience and gains. Talk to the world by right of a country that is breaking out of the colonization matrix and standing up with dignity. There's a lot to be said about ourselves. This is a civilian position, and this is the responsibility of the state, is to catalyze and align all those processes and the architecture. There should be simple and straightforward answers to questions. And when you, for example, talk to the Ukrainian military, and it's about 3 kilometers from the front line, they tell you out of a sudden, like, there's no soldier, no infantryman, no techie without any cultural background, without understanding his place in the world, will never understand what he's fighting for. And this way you cannot provide full-fledged assistance. In these conditions, you understand in the best way that the culture groove has no right to stop. In this world that is balancing on the verge of a global catastrophe, Ukraine needs to aspire to be itself. Thank you, dear colleagues, for your hard work, and thank you for your attention, and have a fruitful forum.